Harold was the kind of man everyone in his neighborhood knew. For more than 30 years, he had been a teacher at the local high school. Even after retiring, he still spent his mornings reading the newspaper on his porch and his afternoons helping children with their homework at the small community center down the street. People often stopped by to wave or chat with him. To them, he was more than just an old man who lived alone. He was someone who had guided their children, taught them to believe in themselves, and always reminded them that being honest was the strongest thing anyone could be. One cool Saturday afternoon, Harold was driving home from the grocery store. He had picked up a few things, some bread, milk, and a bag of apples. His car, an old silver sedan that had seen better days, moved slowly along the road. Harold didn't like rushing. He had lived long enough to know that patience made life easier. The radio played softly in the background, and the quiet of the drive felt peaceful. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A police car was right behind him, sirens briefly blaring before going silent. Harold frowned, wondering what he had done wrong. He pulled over to the side of the road carefully, just as his father had taught him years ago. Hands on the steering wheel, calm, respectful, no sudden moves. The officer who stepped out of the patrol car was tall and serious-looking. He walked up slowly, resting one hand on his holster. Harold rolled down his window and offered a polite smile. "Afternoon, officer. Did I do something wrong?" he asked gently. The officer, whose badge read "Done," didn't return the smile. His eyes scanned the car quickly before saying, "Broken taillight, license and registration." Harold nodded and reached into the glove compartment slowly to get the documents. He handed them over, but before he could say another word, Dunn asked, "Where are you headed?" "Just home, officer." "I live 2 streets down," Harold replied. Dunn didn't answer right away. He looked around the car again, peering into the back seat where Harold's grocery bag sat. Something about his expression made Harold uneasy. He had been stopped by police before years ago, but this felt different. There was something cold and dismissive in the officer's tone, something that made Harold's stomach tighten. "I'll need you to step out of the vehicle," Dunn suddenly said. Harold blinked in confusion. "Is there a problem?" "Just step out. I'll explain." He opened the door slowly and got out, clutching his cane for support. His knees ached, but he stood tall. Dunn told him to wait by the front of the car. Harold obeyed, not wanting to cause trouble. A few cars drove by, slowing down to look. Dunn circled Harold's car, opened the trunk, and started searching without asking. Harold watched, his heart beginning to beat faster. He had nothing to hide, but still, the sight of someone digging through his things made him uneasy. "Sir, do you have anything in this car I should know about?" Dunn asked loudly. "No, officer," Harold said quietly. "Just groceries." Dunn kept looking. Then after a few moments, he straightened up with something small in his hand. It was a plastic bag with a white powder inside. Harold stared at it, confused. "What is that?" Dunn turned toward him, holding it up like proof. "You tell me. Found it in your trunk." Harold's heart sank. "That's not mine. I don't even know what that is," he said quickly, his voice trembling now. Dunn smirked. "Sure it's not. You're under arrest for possession of illegal substances." The words hit Harold like a blow. He tried to speak, but the officer had already turned him around and placed cold metal cuffs around his wrists. "Officer, please, you've made a mistake. I swear. Save it for the judge," Dunn said sharply. By now, a few people had stopped on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. Among them was a young man who had been walking his dog. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Harold's wrinkled face showed pure confusion and fear, while Dunn appeared calm, almost proud. The young man whispered to the woman beside him, "That guy's Mr. Harold. He's been teaching around here for years. He wouldn't hurt anyone." Harold was placed in the back of the police car. He sat there staring through the glass, trying to make sense of what just happened. His mind ran through every possibility. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Dunn had mixed up the cars. But deep down, something told him this wasn't just a mistake. It felt deliberate. At the station, the booking process was humiliating. Harold had never been in trouble with the law. The officers on duty looked at him strangely, whispering among themselves. Some recognized him from the community, but no one dared to say much. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. That night, he sat quietly on the bench, his hands folded on his lap. The room smelled of old concrete and disinfectant. Through the bars, he could see a small, flickering light in the hallway. It reminded him of the classroom lights he used to turn off at the end of the day after grading papers. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, trying to stay calm. At home, his daughter Lisa waited anxiously. She had called his phone several times with no answer. When she finally got a call from the police, she couldn't believe what they told her. Her father, the man who used to spend Sundays helping the pastor organize food drives, was in custody for drug possession. She grabbed her coat and drove to the station immediately. When she saw him through the glass during visitation, her eyes filled with tears. Harold looked tired but still composed. He tried to smile for her. "Daddy, what happened?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It's not what it looks like," Harold said softly. "The officer found something in my trunk. But it's not mine, Lisa. I swear on everything I know, it's not mine." "I know, Daddy," she said, pressing her hand against the glass. "We'll fix this. I'll get you out." The next morning, news of Harold's arrest began to spread. People at the community center were in shock. Some refused to believe it, while others feared it was another case of injustice. One of the young men who had recorded the arrest posted the video online, writing that something about the officer's behavior seemed suspicious. In the video, Dunn could be seen pacing around the trunk for several seconds before pulling out the plastic bag. The comments poured in quickly, some defending Harold, others calling for an investigation. Meanwhile, Officer Dunn wrote his report, confident that no one would question it. He had done this before, like not planting evidence but using his authority to intimidate people he didn't like. He believed Harold was just another old man who wouldn't fight back. That evening, Harold's lawyer, a friend of Lisa's from church, came to visit him. She listened carefully to everything Harold said, taking notes and asking questions. When he mentioned that the officer never asked permission to search his car, her eyes narrowed. "That's important," she said. "We can use that." Harold nodded slowly. He was still shaken, still trying to understand how his ordinary life had suddenly turned into a nightmare. He had always told his students that truth had a way of coming out eventually. But sitting in that cold cell, those words felt like distant hope. Later that night, as the lights dimmed in the holding area, Harold sat alone, thinking about all the faces of people he had taught over the years. He thought of their laughter, their dreams, the lessons he had tried to teach them about integrity. He wondered what they would think if they saw him now. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself again, "The truth will come out. It has to." Outside the station, the city moved on as usual, cars passing by, people hurrying home from work, unaware that something deeply unjust had just taken place. But the video posted online had already begun to gain views, and soon, more eyes would be on Officer Dunn than he ever expected. Inside that small cell, Harold couldn't have known it yet, but this was only the beginning of a story that would shake the entire town and expose a truth far bigger than one man's arrest. The news of Harold's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had known him for decades could hardly believe what they were hearing. The man who spent his life teaching children about honesty and respect, the man who had spent hours after school helping students with their homework, was suddenly accused of possessing illegal drugs. Many residents shook their heads in disbelief. Some whispered to each other about how unfair the world could be, while others started making calls hoping someone could help. At home, Harold's daughter Lisa was frantic. She could not sit still. She paced the floor of her small apartment, her phone pressed to her ear as she called every lawyer she knew. Her father had always been a quiet, careful man, someone who never raised his voice, someone who lived with dignity. There was no way he could have done what the officer accused him of. Lisa's hands trembled as she typed messages to friends, asking for advice and sharing her fear. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Meanwhile, Harold sat in the holding cell at the police station. The night had been long and uncomfortable. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting shadows across the walls. He had barely slept, tossing and turning on the hard bench. Thoughts of his life, his students, his friends, and his family ran through his mind. He tried to remember the lessons he had taught over the years, to stay calm, to face problems with integrity, to always trust the truth, but right now, it felt impossible to believe that justice would reach him. The following morning, a young man named Terrence, who had witnessed the arrest, returned to the scene. He had posted the video online, and it was quickly gaining attention. People were sharing it across social media, with captions calling for fairness and justice. Terrence was not a hero by nature, but he felt he had to do something. Seeing Harold, a man he admired, humiliated like that had shaken him deeply. "I can't just sit back and watch," Terrence said to his younger brother. "That man didn't do anything wrong. I saw everything." The community began to rally quietly. Neighbors who had once nodded politely to Harold on the street now stopped to offer words of support. Some started organizing small meetings at local coffee shops, trying to figure out how they could help. They shared memories of Harold, stories of the help he had given them and their families over the years, hoping that someone in authority might finally listen. Back at the station, Officer Dunn wrote his report with a sense of confidence. He had done things like this before and believed the system would protect him. He described the drugs as found in plain view in the trunk, stating that Harold had no explanation. Dunn's report was filled with formal language meant to sound official and unquestionable. In his mind, Harold was just another old man who would not fight back, and this was just another day of doing his job. Harold's lawyer, Clara, was a woman with a reputation for fighting tough cases. She had spent years defending people who were falsely accused, and she had a reputation for thoroughness and persistence. When Lisa contacted her, she did not hesitate. Clara listened carefully as Lisa explained what had happened, then spoke directly to Harold in a brief phone call. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Harold, I believe you. We are going to get through this. There are ways to challenge what the officer says, and we will do everything we can to prove the truth," Clara said. Harold felt a small spark of hope. Hearing someone speak with confidence, someone who genuinely seemed to care about him, gave him the courage to keep going. He realized that he was not alone. People were paying attention, people who wanted to see justice done. The community's interest continued to grow. Small groups of neighbors began to gather outside the station, some holding signs, others simply standing in silent support. They didn't know exactly how to fight the situation, but their presence sent a message. Harold was not invisible, and the people around him would not let his case be ignored. As the days passed, Lisa worked tirelessly with Clara to gather evidence. They reviewed old records, talked to witnesses, and examined every detail they could. One thing became clear. The officer's story had inconsistencies. Statements about the timing of events, descriptions of the search, and even minor details about the trunk itself did not line up. Clara noted each discrepancy carefully. She knew these small details could make a big difference in court. Inside the cell, Harold spent hours thinking. He reflected on his life, the students he had taught, the people he had helped, and the values he had tried to instill. He realized that fear could be a tool, but it could also weaken a person. He decided he would face this challenge as he had faced every other obstacle, with patience, dignity, and truth. Even as his body ached from age and confinement, his mind remained alert and focused. Terrence, the young man who had recorded the arrest, started to connect with local reporters. He shared his video explaining what he had seen. He described how Dunn seemed nervous and hesitant at moments, how he handled the trunk in a strange way, and how Harold had not resisted or acted suspiciously. The video began to attract attention outside their small town. People online were commenting, sharing, and calling for an investigation. The story was slowly gaining momentum, and Harold's plight was no longer just a local issue. Back at the police station, some officers began whispering among themselves. A few knew Harold personally. They had seen him at community events, had known his family, had respected him for his decades of service. There were murmurs about whether the arrest was truly fair, but no one wanted to confront Officer Dunn directly. They knew his reputation, and fear often silenced good people. Harold's daughter Lisa refused to let fear control her. She met Clara in person for the first time, going over every document, every statement, and every piece of evidence. They discussed the video, the officer's report, and potential witnesses who could testify about Harold's character. Every detail mattered. They knew that proving Harold's innocence would require persistence, patience, and careful planning. As the week went on, the local media started picking up the story. Reporters interviewed neighbors, students who had grown up under Harold's guidance, and even local business owners who had known him for years. Everyone had something positive to say about Harold. His honesty, his kindness, his dedication. This created a stark contrast to the allegations against him. The more people spoke, the more the narrative began to shift. Inside the holding cell, Harold continued to keep his composure. Each day he reminded himself to stay strong, to trust that truth and justice had a way of reaching the surface. He reflected on the moments in life when things seemed impossible, and yet somehow they had worked out. He thought about the lessons he had taught his students, lessons about fairness, courage, and the power of speaking up. Those lessons were not just for them. They were for him now, too. Lisa stayed by his side through phone calls and brief visits, always reminding him that he was not alone. She encouraged him to rest when he could, to keep hope alive, and to trust that the growing support outside would make a difference. Harold felt comfort in her words. Even though the situation was terrifying, he realized that community, family, and truth could be stronger than fear. By the end of the week, the tension in the neighborhood was noticeable. People discussed the case everywhere, and at the grocery store, at the community center, and on street corners. Harold's story had become a symbol of the challenges many faced, the unfairness that sometimes existed, and the resilience required to confront it. But it was also a story of hope, of people coming together to support someone who had spent a lifetime helping others. As the weekend approached, Clara and Lisa prepared to take further steps. They were confident that with the video, witness statements, and the growing community attention, they could begin to build a strong case to challenge the arrest. Harold, even in his cell, felt a sense of calm determination. He realized that his life, his values, and the support of people who believed in him would be the foundation for the fight ahead. In those quiet moments, as Harold sat alone reflecting on his life and the unexpected challenge before him, he understood something important. Fear could paralyze people, but courage could inspire them. The truth, no matter how hidden or delayed, could break through lies and injustice. And for Harold, that understanding gave him the strength to face the coming days with dignity and hope. Outside, the city moved on, but Harold's story was only beginning. The people who loved him and believed in him were already planning, preparing, and speaking out. The ripple of support was growing stronger with each passing day. Harold might have been in a cell now, accused of something he did not do, but he was not powerless. And little did anyone know, the events of the coming weeks would change everything. Not just for Harold, but for the community, and even for the officer who thought he had control. The days after Harold's arrest passed slowly. Every morning in the holding cell felt the same, the harsh lights, the cold metal bench, and the faint smell of disinfectant. But Harold had learned to find small comforts wherever he could. He would close his eyes and imagine sitting on his porch, the warm sun on his face, children running by with laughter echoing in the air. That image gave him strength. Outside the station, the community's support continued to grow. People who had once just nodded politely to Harold now spoke up for him. They posted stories on social media, shared memories, and began asking questions about Officer Dunn. Parents brought their children to the community center to hear about Harold and his life, reinforcing the man's reputation for kindness and honesty. The neighborhood had begun to unite in a way Harold had not seen in years. Lisa spent almost every waking hour coordinating with Clara. They reviewed every detail of the arrest, every piece of evidence, and every witness statement. They worked, late into the night, making lists of people who could testify to Harold's character, and who could speak about the suspicious behavior of Officer Dunn. Each day Lisa felt more determined to clear her father's name. Every conversation she had with Clara seemed to bring a glimmer of hope. Terrence, the young man who had filmed the arrest, continued to play a quiet but important role. He spoke, with reporters, answered questions, and provided details about what he saw. His recording of the arrest had captured something crucial. Dunn's hands moving strangely around the trunk before pulling out the bag of drugs. It was a small detail, but it mattered. It showed movement that did not match the official story, and Clara immediately noticed it. Meanwhile, the police department began to feel pressure. The video of the arrest had gone viral locally, and people outside the neighborhood had started asking questions. Some officers whispered about how unfair the arrest had seemed, but few were willing to speak openly. Dunn, on the other hand, grew uneasy. He was used to handling situations quietly and making problems disappear, but this time the situation seemed different. The attention was growing, and the more people watched, the harder it became to control the narrative. Harold spent hours thinking about what had happened. He reflected on the officer's actions, the words exchanged during the arrest, and the way the drugs had suddenly appeared in his trunk. It didn't make sense, and yet he could feel the truth quietly simmering beneath it all. He remembered teaching his students about fairness and courage, and he realized that those lessons were for moments like this. The truth would come out, and he had to stay patient. At the station, Dunn continued writing reports and speaking to supervisors. He tried to portray Harold as suspicious, as someone who could not be trusted, but inconsistencies began to appear in his own story. Different officers noticed small contradictions. Times didn't match, statements seemed off, and the timeline of events didn't make sense. For the first time, Dunn felt a flicker of worry. He had assumed that the system would protect him, that no one would question him, but the growing attention made him nervous. In the meantime, Clara and Lisa decided to reach out to additional witnesses. They spoke with neighbors, local business owners, and friends of Harold. Each person they spoke to painted the same picture. Harold was honest, reliable, and respected in the community. They described his lifelong dedication to teaching and helping others. Every statement built a stronger case and created a clear contrast to the accusations made by Dunn. The media began to pick up on the story in more detail. Reporters visited the neighborhood, interviewed Harold's former students, and recorded reactions from people who knew him. The coverage showed Harold not as a criminal but as a respected elder, someone whose life had been devoted to helping others. The narrative began to shift, and the story attracted the attention of civil rights organizations. These groups started asking questions and requesting information about the arrest and Dunn's past behavior. Inside the holding cell, Harold received a visit from Clara. She explained the next steps clearly and calmly. She had begun the process of requesting the body cam footage and other police records. She described how the inconsistencies in Dunn's report could be used to challenge the arrest in court. Harold listened carefully, absorbing each word. Clara's confidence gave him hope, but he also realized that the fight would not be easy. "You have to stay calm, Harold," Clara said softly. "The truth is on our side, but we have to show it carefully. Every detail matters. We'll get through this." Harold nodded. "I trust you, Clara. I just want the truth to be seen." As days turned into a week, the community continued to grow more involved. Some neighbors organized small gatherings to discuss what was happening and to plan ways to support Harold and his family. Others reached out to their contacts, trying to spread the story further. People were starting to see this as more than just a single arrest. It was a reflection of the challenges and injustices faced by many in the community. Meanwhile, the young man Terrence continued to monitor online activity. The video he recorded had gone viral locally, and people were commenting on it, analyzing every frame. Some noticed the movements of Dunn's hands, the way he handled the bag of drugs, and the inconsistencies in his story. It became clear to many viewers that something was not right. The attention added more pressure on the police department to investigate thoroughly. Harold's health was another concern. Sitting in the holding cell for long hours, combined with stress and worry, took a toll on him physically. His knees ached, his back hurt, and the uncertainty of his situation weighed heavily on his mind. But he drew strength from small things. A kind word from a fellow detainee, a phone call from Lisa, a message from a former student expressing support. Those little reminders of the world outside gave him hope. Lisa, meanwhile, was tireless. She coordinated meetings with Clara, spoke with reporters, and maintained contact with Harold whenever possible. She also spent time comforting friends and neighbors who were worried about her father. Her determination never wavered, and every conversation she had seemed to reinforce her belief that justice could be achieved. During this time, Dunn began to make mistakes. His initial confidence started to waver. He became impatient, and some of his statements began to contradict each other. Small errors crept into his reports, and those errors would later become significant. For the first time, the officer began to realize that the situation might not be as easy to control as he had thought. Inside the cell, Harold continued to reflect. He thought about the lessons he had tried to teach his students. Lessons about fairness, honesty, and courage. He realized that his life had always been about helping others, and now he needed to apply those same principles to himself. He reminded himself that fear and anger would not help. Staying calm, staying honest, and trusting that the truth would come out were his best tools. As the days passed, Clara filed formal requests for all available evidence. She sought every document, every video recording, and every report that could be used to show inconsistencies in Dunn's story. She began to build a detailed timeline of the arrest, carefully comparing each detail with witness statements and the video recorded by Terrence. Each new piece of information strengthened Harold's case. The community, now fully aware of the situation, continued to support Harold in every way possible. They wrote letters, made phone calls, and attended meetings to raise awareness. Even people outside the town began to notice, and the story began to spread to other communities. Harold's reputation as a kind, honest, and hardworking man helped counter the false accusations, and more people began to demand accountability. Finally, after more than a week in detention, Harold received another visit from Clara. She explained that they had gathered enough evidence to begin challenging the case. The body cam footage, witness statements, and community support all painted a clear picture. Harold was innocent, and Officer Dunn's story was full of holes. Harold felt a renewed sense of hope. He realized that he was no longer alone in this fight. His daughter, his lawyer, the community, and even strangers who had seen the video were standing with him. It was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, truth and support could make a difference. He thought about the coming court dates and the steps ahead. The road would not be easy, but Harold now understood that courage, patience, and persistence were his allies. The events of the past days had been difficult, but they had also revealed something important. He was part of a community that would not let him face injustice alone. As Harold prepared for the next stage of his journey, he felt a quiet confidence growing within him. The world outside the cell had begun to notice, and people were beginning to see the truth. The situation that had once seemed hopeless was now a fight he could face with dignity. He knew that the coming days would be challenging, but he also knew that he had the truth, the support of those who cared, and the strength he had built over a lifetime to guide him through. The story was far from over, but Harold had already learned an important lesson. Even when the world seems unfair, standing firm in truth and courage can begin to turn the tide. And in the small town that had watched his life unfold, people were watching now, ready to support him, and waiting to see justice finally done. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Harold felt a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination. He had spent long hours in the holding cell, thinking, reflecting, and preparing himself mentally for this moment. He knew that the truth was on his side, but stepping into the courtroom for the first time since the arrest felt like walking into an unknown world. The tall wooden doors, the echoing sounds, and the serious expressions of people in suits made the room feel intimidating. Still, Harold held his cane firmly in one hand and walked with dignity, refusing to let fear take over. Lisa was by his side, holding his arm gently. She had been through sleepless nights coordinating with Clara, planning every step and making sure her father's side of the story was fully represented. She gave him a reassuring look as they entered the courtroom together. Harold gave her a small, grateful smile. The support of his daughter had kept him strong throughout the ordeal, and seeing her courage helped him focus on the task ahead. Clara had prepared thoroughly. She had gone over every piece of evidence multiple times, knowing that every detail could make a difference. She had gathered witness statements, the video footage from Terrence, and information about inconsistencies in Dunn's reports. As she spoke quietly to Harold, she reminded him to remain calm and let the facts speak for themselves. The courtroom began to fill with people. Some were neighbors who had come to show support. Others were reporters and community members curious about the case. There was a tension in the air, the kind of tension that comes from knowing that something unfair was being challenged. Officer Dunn sat at the prosecution table looking uneasy. For the first time, the confident expression he usually wore seemed forced, almost anxious. He had been used to controlling situations, but now he could feel the eyes of the public on him, watching for every mistake. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Harold stood, showing respect as the proceedings began. The prosecution presented their case first, showing the bag of drugs and insisting it had been found in Harold's trunk. They described their version of events with confidence, expecting the courtroom to accept it without question. But Clara was ready. She had a calm confidence, one that came from knowing the truth and being prepared to show it clearly. When Clara stood to present the defense, she spoke slowly and clearly. She first addressed the inconsistencies in the officer's report. She pointed out the timing of events, showing how certain details did not match what actually happened. She compared these statements to the video footage recorded by Terrence, highlighting movements that suggested the evidence might not have been where the officer claimed it was. Every point she made built a clearer picture of what truly occurred. The courtroom shifted as Clara presented each piece of evidence. The video footage was played for everyone to see. It showed Dunn walking around the trunk in an unusual manner, pausing and then handling the bag of drugs in a way that did not match the official report. The jury watched silently, and a few gasps could be heard from the public seating area. People began to understand that Harold's story of innocence was supported by real, undeniable evidence. Next, Clara called witnesses. Neighbors spoke about Harold's character, emphasizing his honesty, kindness, and long history of helping the community. Former students spoke about how he had guided them, taught them respect, and served as a role model. Each testimony reinforced the idea that Harold was the opposite of what the officer claimed. These people had nothing to gain by speaking. They simply wanted to share the truth. The tension grew as Clara presented expert analysis of the body cam footage. A technology expert explained that parts of the video had been altered or deleted, suggesting that the officer had manipulated evidence. This revelation sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Even Dunn seemed to falter, his confidence wavering under the weight of the evidence against him. The judge listened carefully, his expression serious as the truth of the situation began to unfold. Harold remained composed, though his heart raced. He could feel the tension in the room, but he also felt a sense of relief. For the first time since the arrest, the focus was not on accusations or fear, but on facts and truth. He realized that every moment of patience, every act of courage, and every piece of evidence had led to this point. Lisa watched with tears in her eyes. She had spent days worrying, planning, and hoping, and now she could see that the fight was turning in their favor. She squeezed her father's hand gently, whispering words of encouragement. Harold nodded slightly, drawing strength from her presence and from the knowledge that justice might finally be within reach. Clara then turned to the jury and summarized the key points. She explained how the officer's actions did not match standard procedure, how the evidence had inconsistencies, and how multiple witnesses supported Harold's character and innocence. She spoke with a quiet authority, letting the facts speak louder than emotion, though her passion for justice was clear. The prosecution tried to respond, but their arguments felt weaker in comparison. The inconsistencies in the officer's story, the eyewitness video, and the statements from the community made it clear that their case was not as strong as they had hoped. The courtroom began to sense the shift. People who had come to watch now understood that this was not just a legal battle, but a matter of truth prevailing over falsehood. After closing statements, the jury went to deliberate. The waiting period was tense. Harold sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the long hours of preparation, the support from his daughter and Clara, and the faith that the community had placed in him. Even in these moments of uncertainty, he felt a calm determination. He knew that truth had a way of coming out, even if it took time. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the judge asked for the verdict. Harold held his breath, gripping his cane tightly. When the foreperson spoke, the words seemed to echo through the room. Harold was found not guilty on all charges. A wave of relief and emotion swept through the courtroom. Lisa burst into tears and hugged her father tightly. Neighbors who had come to support him clapped quietly, some wiping away tears. Harold felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and vindication. After days of fear and uncertainty, the truth had finally been recognized. Officer Dunn sat at the prosecution table, pale and shaken. The confidence he had displayed during the arrest and in his reports was gone. For the first time, he was confronted with the consequences of his actions. The courtroom had seen the evidence, the inconsistencies and the courage of Harold and his supporters. Dunn's reputation would never recover from this moment. The judge addressed Harold personally, expressing regret for what he had endured and acknowledging the courage he had shown throughout the process. "Justice must serve everyone equally," the judge said, "and today the truth has been upheld." Harold nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement but also aware that the fight for fairness did not end here. As they left the courtroom, Harold felt the weight of the past days lift slightly. He had been accused unfairly, humiliated, and challenged in ways he had never imagined, but he had survived. He had faced injustice with patience, dignity, and courage, and the truth had prevailed. The experience had changed him, but it had also reaffirmed his belief in the power of honesty, integrity, and community support. Outside, the crowd of supporters had grown. People cheered quietly as Harold and Lisa walked to their car. Reporters approached to ask questions, and Harold spoke carefully, expressing gratitude to those who had supported him and emphasizing the importance of standing up for truth and justice. The story quickly spread beyond the town. News outlets shared the courtroom outcome, highlighting the courage of Harold, the dedication of Clara, and the growing awareness of misconduct within the police department. The case became a symbol of accountability and a reminder that even in situations where the odds seem impossible, justice can prevail when truth and courage are on your side. That evening, Harold returned to his home. Sitting on his porch, he looked at the neighborhood he had known for decades. Children played nearby, neighbors waved, and life continued. He felt a sense of peace he had not felt in weeks. The ordeal was over, and yet he knew that the fight for fairness in the wider world was ongoing. He also knew that his story could inspire others to speak up, to remain steadfast, and to trust that truth has a way of finding its place. In the quiet of his home, Harold reflected on everything that had happened: the fear, the injustice, the support of his community, and the final triumph of truth. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. And with that thought, he closed his eyes for the first time in weeks, feeling a sense of hope and resilience that would stay with him long after the courtroom doors had closed. The journey was far from over, but Harold had taken the most important step. He had faced injustice directly, with the support of his daughter, his lawyer, and his community, and he had proven that truth, when presented clearly and courageously, could not be ignored. It was a moment that would be remembered not only by those in the courtroom that day, but by everyone who believed in fairness and the power of standing up for what is right.